to unionization is deliberately very difficult in this goddamn country. Pardon my language, but like the deck is stacked so far in favor of the bosses that when I talk to workers and organizers outside of the U.S., they're baffled by how many hoops you have to jump through just to like get to a union election, let alone like get to a first contract. And the average time it takes to get from a winning an election to a first contract is like a year and a half. And in that time, you can retaliate against a lot of workers like Starbucks has been doing in broad daylight, like Amazon has been doing, like Chipotle has been doing. You can intimidate people. You can make their lives worse and eventually demoralize them. And if you stall long enough, you can have a decertification vote and essentially throw the whole thing out. So there's so many mechanisms in place that make it so hard to actually unionize your workplace, even though we recognize that as a fundamental right that working people in this country have, a right that is routinely and blatantly violated by employers across the country. And then it takes months, if not years, for justice to be served. Just to give one example, I spoke with Brandon McNeese, brilliant worker and organizer at the Chipotle location in Augusta, Maine. The first Chipotle that was going to file for a union election. And on the day that filing was going to happen, Chipotle closed the store. Now, months later, the National Labor Relations Board came out and said, this was retaliation. This was wrong. Chipotle should reopen the store. It should recognize the union and bargain in good faith. But that's been months. So companies and the bosses in this country, they can just move forward and break things willy-nilly. And the consequences that they face for that are so lax that they have very little incentive to change their behavior. So what can we do to fix that?
Yeah.
Well, there are a number of things. I mean, yes, the electoral realm is part of that, right? You can push, your elected representatives to actually give a shit about this and to fight for it. There are numerous pieces of legislation that have been on the table, some that have died. The PRO Act has been there. It passed the House. It never got a vote in the Senate. But this is something that, would be a game changer for labor relations in this country. And the Democrats have not made it a priority, so on and so forth. But if, you wanted to advocate for that, that's there for you. The thing that I would really urge people, though, is that where you can help most, there are two ways that I would urge people to help most if this is what you care about. One, we have to support each other. We are all we've got, right? As we've already said, no party really has an interest in being the champion of the working class or the labor movement. That has to come from us, right? And so what we need to do is to continuously support one another in our efforts to unionize, to speak up against discrimination or mistreatment in the workplace, to hold companies accountable for the ways that they exploit their workers or so on and so forth. So just being there for each other, not just online, but actually showing up and providing that support. That's how we keep this movement going. We can't just be watching it from the side and hope it keeps going. We are the movement. If it's going to keep going, it's going to happen from us keeping it going. The other thing I would say is that you don't have to be in an official union to act like one, right? This is a great line that the great Rebecca Given at Rutgers told me once on my podcast that I think is really instructive. There are actually a lot of ways that you can be liberated from the shackles of labor law in this country if you just stand together with your fellow workers or with your community in concerted action and, do something about what's going on in your world. The one example I point to that I think is so inspiring when so few things in this country and in this world is the Najuan Support Network in Toronto that we did a report on at The Real News in the summer. So this is a group of Punjabi student immigrant workers in Canada who a lot of them are on student visas, which means that they can't work enough to, maintain a good living there and send money back home because their hours are limited to like 20 hours a week. So a lot of them will work under the table, and they are ripe for exploitation from employers who know that they can underpay them and that they can threaten their visas if they speak up. So what do? They have imported some of the militant tactics from the Indian farmer strikes into suburban Toronto, where they've got essentially a whole community marching on the boss. They'll hold these massive rallies of like grandmas, kids, neighbors marching in these massive crowds to these businesses with signs with the boss's face on them saying, this guy is a wage thief. He has stolen this much money from like this many employees. They will go to their boss's houses and they will write in chalk outside of their driveway, a wage thief lives here. Like, take that for what you will, but the point is that they were in a very hyper exploitable situation, and they got around that through people power, through joining together and actually standing up as a group. So there are a lot of ways that you can do something to help, but first you have to realize that it is up to you and your fellow workers and your neighbors to make that change, not, something that you have to just wait for someone else to give you permission for.
And I think labor is really the only way that this is going to change, because when we were at the polls earlier, this gentleman who is with the firefighters union, and is definitely a pro-labor guy, but he is a Trump DeSantis Republican through and through. And ultimately, you're going to find in labor that everyone across the political spectrum is interested in making sure that they have a living wage, health care, and a dignified life to live. That is something that crosses all political barriers, as far as I'm concerned. And if we fight on that front, like, you cannot be in labor and think that because somebody thinks something differently in terms of, let's say, their social values and whatnot, that is a disclaimer and that you can no longer work with that person. No, it doesn't work that way. We're all different in our own way. And if we're all fighting to actually have a fighting chance to have some semblance of a democracy in this country, because it's going away every day. And this election, in some ways, doesn't really mean anything. It just kind of reinforces where things are going in 24. I've been saying it for a while. Jen's been saying it for a while. If I'm putting money on the table right now, Ron DeSantis is our next president. And based on the results of tonight, that doesn't change it. It only enhances it. But what we need to be focused on, as you were alluding to, is if you think that electoral politics is how we're going to get a living wage, universal health care, a clean energy grid, end the endless wars, and be able to have criminal justice reform, those types of things can't exist through electoral politics. It's not going to happen. It happens when a movement grows so strong that elected officials are actually scared to death of people in that movement, knowing that they can sway an election.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.